G'day guys, welcome back to the Rugby League Guru podcast. We're going to go through our Dragons best 17 for season 2025 today. Once again guys, with all of these, I'm going through the 17 that I would pick, and I will mention here and there where I think the Dragons or the coach will go a little bit differently, but for the most part, it's going to be the team that I would pick. So if you think some things are a little bit rogue and whatnot, I'll explain them as we go. Obviously, guys, if you're watching this on YouTube, you could have watched this a week ago in the Roo Crew. All of our content is in there. Early access and exclusive content as well, along with all of our rumours. I've gone around to all the NRL clubs and spoken to a few senior players to get an indication of guys that have come back looking really good this preseason that are flying. All that information will be in the Roo Crew as well, along with all of our Supercoach stuff this year, our stats. Honestly, too much stuff than you'll have to deal with. Links in the description. Come join the Roo Crew for season 2025. Let's get stuck into the St George Illawarra Dragons, the new look St George Illawarra Dragons for 2025. And I'll tell you what, they might not be a team that people are tipping to make the top 8 and that sort of stuff, and they might not have the stars that other teams have, and they might not have the guns in key positions other teams have. But I'll tell you what, the one thing they do have is a lot of depth, the Dragons. I actually really like this squad. I think it's really well balanced. I think they're going to do better than what people are expecting in 2025. I'm not ruling them out of finishing 7th or 8th, and I think they'll be around that 9, 10, 11 mark. That's where I would bet 9, 10, 11 for the Dragons as it stands right now. I think this is a good squad. I think that the coach will get more out of them than what most coaches would, and I just think they'll be sort of a tough bunch. I think that they will be ugly at times. I think they'll be inconsistent at times, but I think all in all, I think they'll end up being in the top 10 or 11 teams this year, which whether you appreciate that or not, that's up to you. But I don't think they're going to be the train wreck that a lot of people are tipping them to be. Let's go through their side. Obviously, the news came out the other day that they have gone with new co-captains, Clint Gutherson and Damien Cook. We spoke about that on the podcast the other day. I love the selection. I'm all for it. You can go and have a listen to that if you'd like. Gutho, he is the obvious choice at fullback. He will be the one. Obviously, Sloan has played there the last few years. I don't think Sloan has ever really nailed down that spot realistically. I thought last year I would have given Lomax an opportunity there. They went with Sloan. Gutho, he is the best fullback at the club. He is the captain. He will be the fullback come round 1 and the guy they're going to build this team around. On the wings, one of them, Tuipulotu, I thought he was fucking outstanding last year. I was so impressed with the season he had. He really jumped out of the ground for me. Maybe I just underappreciated him when he had time at the Manly Seagulls. But honestly, I was so impressed with him. I'm really looking forward to seeing how he goes this year. I think he's in for a very good season. So Tuipulotu, he picks himself on one wing. The other wing spot, it's open to negotiation a little bit for me. I originally wrote down Sloan. You have got Ravalawa in the squad. I think Ravalawa has been solid for a very long time. I think Sloan has potentially got a little bit more upside. I want to see how he goes as a winger and see how he goes in the preseason. One of those two. My initial reaction was Sloan, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought, fuck, that's maybe a little bit unfair to Ravalawa, who's done it and done it well for a few years. So we'll see how that plays out. One of those two. Once again, guys, I really like the depth of this squad. If something was to happen to Gutho, you move Sloan back there. He wasn't a train wreck for them the last few years. He'd be okay there. And there's a chance Sloan doesn't even make the side because Ravalawa gets that wing spot. I think Tuipulotu, he's the best winger at the club as it stands right now. He's my favourite winger at the club. One of those two, I think, will grab that wing spot. Let's move to the centres. New arrival, Valentine Holmes. I'm so excited to see how he goes at the Dragons. And to be honest with you, I'm interested to see how he goes at the Dragons. I think attacking-wise, he is an absolute elite centre. He's an elite attacking player in our game. He'll be fine. Defensively, I got to tell you, I've been so disappointed with Val at club level for the last 2 years defensively. And I feel like he wasn't like that the few years before that. So I'm keen to see how he goes arriving at the Dragons because I don't think Shane Flanagan will cop that the way that I think the Cowboys were happy to over the last few years. And it's really interesting. His centre partner, Moses Sully, I genuinely think he's one of the most improved players in the competition over the last few years. And for me, he has turned into one of the better defensive centres. And I'll tell you what, he sure as fuck wasn't that guy when he came into first grade. He wasn't that guy when he arrived at the Dragons. Shane Flanagan and the Dragons have had a big influence on him and especially his defensive game. I'm expecting them to have a big influence on Val Holmes as well. So keen to see how he goes. Sully, Val Holmes, they pick themselves as the centres in this side, and I think it's one of the better centre combinations in the NRL, to be honest with you. I love it. Let's move to the halves. And look, The halves pick themselves, Flanagan and Ilias. It's who plays 7, who plays 6. It's also the argument, how important is it? What does it matter? I saw a predicted team that came out the other day from Fox League. They had Ilias at 7, Flanagan at 6. I would say that's just off the fact that Flanagan wore the 6 last year. Flanagan was the halfback last year. I think if you understand rugby league, you understand what you're looking at. Flanagan was the halfback. Ben Hunt sort of played a second fiddle role. Flanagan's my halfback without a fucking doubt. Ilias has only played halfback in first grade. He did win a comp at 5'8" in the New South Wales Cup a couple of years ago. I think that Ilias, he's got a bit more of a running game than what we've seen so far. I think Flanagan's the better halfback. I think he's the better guy to direct traffic. I think that, he's lucky enough to have his old man as the coach. I think just getting the messages out there and sticking to a game plan, I think Flano will understand Shane better than anyone. So for me, I understand why people are putting Ilias at 7 because he played there at the Rabbitohs. I think he'll be the 6. I think Flanagan will be the 7. But I think a lot of predicted teams will have the opposite. I think it's pretty obvious. You have Flanagan at 7, you have Ilias at 6. But we'll see how that plays out. But that's what I would do. That would be my halves pairing. Are they an elite halves pairing? No, they're not. Are you paying them elite halves pairing money? Also, no, you're not. They're paying that in other spots. And I just think I think that Flano's objective with these two will be just put us into good spots. Don't shit the bed. Just put us into good spots. Stick to the game plan that we are going to play to, and I think the Dragons will be okay with these two. I think Flanagan was really good last year. He obviously had the bite at the back end of the season that took him out of the remainder of the year, but I thought he was really good. And Ilias, he's coming back from injury. He's got something to prove at the moment. He can play Ilias. I think he was a scapegoat for a lot of things, and I think he'll do better in the 5'8" jersey, to be honest with you. Let's move into the forward pack. I had a couple of tough decisions to make here, to be honest with you, and I changed this team a few times. What I've settled on is my front rowers that I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with Francis Molo, and I'm going to go with Blake Lawrie. Now, I could be completely wrong and talking out of my ass, and I'm happy to wear that if I'm off the mark. I don't think Flano's a huge Blake Lawrie fan. He was the main front row forward at the club before he arrived. Since then, his minutes have dropped. Sometimes he's not on the side, sometimes he's off the bench. I don't think Flano is a big Blake Lawrie guy. Personally, I would pick him as my starting front rower. I don't think when I look at the rest of this squad, I don't think he's a guy I want playing 50, 60 minutes. I think I only want him for 40 minutes. So in that regard, I kind of get where Flano's coming from. I would have him start the first 20, 25 minutes with Molo. I like that combination to start. And then I would be bringing Blake Lawrie off first. And I'll talk to you about my interchanges when I get to it. But I'd be starting with Lawrie and with Molo. My 9, you got Jacob Little, Damien Cook. I've said all offseason, I think the best way to do this is to start Damien Cook at 9, have Jacob Little at 14. Let Cookie play the first 20, 30 minutes. And then I think you let Cookie transition into that lock forward role. And then you bring Jacob Little on. He plays the remaining 50, 60 minutes. I don't think you need to put Jacob. I think Jacob Little can play 80 minutes. I think he's one of the few hookers in our game that can. But just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think that the best way to deal with it is to have Jacob Little coming off the bench. He plays the last 50 or 60 minutes where he's not as tired. He's fresh coming on against a tired pack. I think he'll do really, really well. I thought he was unreal last season. Damien Cook can start at hooker. He can move into that lock role, maybe have a 10-minute break at some point. That wouldn't shock me, but I think that's the best way to do this. And because that's my plan, it's going to influence how I pick the rest of my team. We'll get to that very soon. Cookie will be my starting 9. On the edges, these two pick themselves. I don't think I need to go into too much detail. Jaden Sewer played Origin last year, played really well under Flano. He's an automatic. And Luciano Leilua obviously arrived back from the North Queensland Cowboys last season. I still think he's got a lot more to offer. Back at his old club, I think he does well. I like that you got 2 big bodies in those two on the edges, 2 guys that can offload, run a good line, got a bit of X factor to them. Once again, you're lacking maybe upside in the halves, but you got these other guys in the team like Holmes, Sully, Leilua, who can create things as well, which I think you need to have that sort of balance. Lock forward. This is tough. I'd go Jack de Belin. Now, I know you guys that are keen Guru fans, you go, what the fuck? You told us how good Tom Eisenhuth was all last fucking year, and I'm still going to tell you Tom Eisenhuth is a good player. I love him. He was my 13 originally. What I've decided, though, is that because I'm going to use Damien Cook as a lock forward, realistically, I think Eisenhuth's good enough to be in the side, but he just doesn't fit how I want to play at the moment. So for me, I'd have Damien Cook at 9, Jack de Belin in jersey 13. It might be a case of when you take a Blake Lawrie off, you don't actually sub him for a front row forward. Maybe you sub him for Jacob Little. Damien Cook moves into 13 and Jack de Belin jumps into that front row role. So I'd be happy to do that. I think it's the best way forward. I feel really bad for Tom Eisenhuth because I think he had a good season and I love him personally. He's one of my favourites. But I'm picking the team that I want to play with around the game plan and how I want to structure my interchanges. And this is how I would go about it. So Jack de Belin would be in jersey 13. Once again, I actually don't think Flano is a huge fan of Jack de Belin in jersey 13, but the reality is he would wear jersey 13, he'd play that role for the first 20 minutes, then Cookie would jump into that role, and Jack de Belin would just play as a front row forward, and he's the guy that I would be hoping I'd get 65, 70 minutes out of per game in the front row, Jack de Belin. So that'd be my 1 to 13. As far as what I think the predicted teams will say and what I think Flano will pick, I think that's going to be pretty spot on. I think that Gutherson, Tuipulotu, Holmes, Sully, I think Sloan will be on the wing. I think for all of his downfalls, I think it's pretty evident that Shane Flanagan does like him. So I think they can make a good winger out of Sloan. I think it might really help him. Halves, Ilias Flanagan. I think he will go Flanagan at halfback. Fox League and everyone you talk to says Flanagan at 6. I'm not buying into that. I think it'll be Flanagan at 7. When it comes to the forward pack, this is what I would do. What Flano will do, I don't know. Because one, I don't think he's a huge Blake Lawrie fan for whatever reason that might be. Two, I don't think he loves de Belin in jersey 13. I think he just likes him as a front row forward. Maybe he thinks he overplays his hand or something. I'm not too sure. But I'm not too sure how he will pick that forward pack. But that's what I've got at the moment. Let's move to my bench. I already mentioned him. Jersey 14, Jacob Little. Honestly, I would have had Jacob Little in the top 5 hookers last year, and people will laugh and scoff at that. If you actually watched every single hooker across the entire season, Jacob Little was fucking tremendous. I wouldn't have had it. I would have Harry Grant at 1, but Jacob Little, I said top 5. I probably would have had him in the top 3. I thought he was really good last season. And I think he was playing big minutes last year. Now he only has to play 50, 60 minutes. I think he's going to be dynamic. I think it's going to be a really nice combination for the Dragons. So Little in 14. Jersey 15, experienced campaigner, Raymond Faitala Mariner. He's in this side for me. He can play middle. He can play edge, jump into that 13 role if need be. I think he's just a good experienced guy to have on your bench. Jersey 16, I would have Toby Couchman. I spoke to one of the senior players at the Dragons the other day. He reckons that both Couchman boys are absolutely flying at the moment. They've been killing it in preseason, looking very, very good. Toby Couchman, he's played about 15 more games than his brother. I would go with Toby Couchman on the bench, but I'll tell you what, I would eventually find space for Ryan because I think these two are going to be guys you can sort of build a forward pack around into the foreseeable future, and I think the Dragons will. So I've got Couchman. Jersey 17, I'm going to go Harm Saleh, a guy that for whatever fucking reason, he just can't stay fit for 10 weeks straight. It feels like every month or two there's a niggling injury or a calf or a hammy or something going on with Harm Saleh. I still think he's a very, very good footballer. I think he's a very good front row forward. And I think that if you can just keep him, if he can play 20 games this year, I think he can take his game to a new level. So I really like the look of him. Harm Saleh. So my bench, Jacob Little, Faitala Mariner, Couchman, and Saleh. Obviously, guys, you are, if you have an injury to the outside backs, you could find yourself in a little bit of curry pretty quickly. I think Couchman could shift out to the centres and probably handle himself there. But you have also got, and, all jokes aside, Damien Cook, he jumped out and played centre in Origin a couple of years ago. Mate, every time he played centre for South Sydney last year, I thought he was unreal. Like, I know it's a bit of a running joke around how rogue Freddie went, but if you get desperate, I think you can throw Cookie out there and I think you'll be okay. So I'm not too concerned about that. I think it's a very well-balanced side, and I think it's a good 17. And look, these are the guys that have missed for me. Tom Eisenhuth, if they have any, an injury through the middle, he can jump in at 13. He can play on edge. I think he's a great guy to have in your squad. At the moment, Ravalawa's not making my side. He's been a consistent guy in the Dragons for a long time, an outside back. A very good guy to have there. Corey Allen's not in my side either. Obviously, returning from an ACL, I want to see how Corey Allen goes. But I think Corey Allen's best spot is fullback, and I don't think you can possibly pick him over Gutho. You got a Fang guy that's not making the side too. Obviously, Max and Matt. I forget which one's at the Dragons, which one's at the Dolphins now. Both of them I really like, though. Great depth. In the forwards, you've obviously got Ryan Couchman, Viliama Fafita. The one I'm keen to see, though, is Pacifici Tonga. Who's obviously a young guy who's come through the system there. He is an enormous bit of gear. I'm very keen to see when he eventually does get into first grade. 19 years old, 120 kgs, big bit of gear. Played in the New South Wales under-19s last year. I think he will make his debut this year. I don't think it'll be round one. I think they've got enough depth that he probably won't debut round one. But at some point throughout season 2025, I think you will see him. And I think he's going to be an important cog for the Dragons. I think they really need him to jump out of the ground. He doesn't need to be Payne Haas or anything like that. But I just think if by the end of the year they can hand him a jersey 17 each week and he can come off the bench and play 25 minutes, I think that'd be unreal for his development. Then he gets another preseason under his belt next year and hopefully he can kick on. Look, I kind of think this will actually be the bench that Flano will go to, obviously pending who he picks in the starting side. But I think Little, Faitala Mariner and Couchman and Sele, I think they're pretty safe picks. I'm pretty confident that is what Flano will do. So that's my Dragon side, guys. As I said, a lot of people tipping them for the wooden spoon and bottom four. I actually think they're going to be okay. I think they'll get very close to the top 8. I think they'll be like a 9, 10, 11 finish. I'm not ruling out a 7, 8 finish, though. I think they potentially could if injuries fall their way and these halves just manage to find their groove quickly together. I think they can be successful. I love the recruitment. Honestly, I look at this at the starting 13. I can't really find a weak spot. I think Sloan will be okay on the wings. I'm not too concerned. I guess you could call the halves a weak spot because they're not like elite talents, but they're also guys that they won't overplay their hand. They'll just stick to the game plan, do what they need to do, kick to the right spots, hopefully kick at the right times, and I think they'll be okay. I don't think the Dragons going to be the tyre fire that a lot of people are expecting, and if they do have injuries, they've got a heap of depth there of guys they can bring in. I do have concerns about the halves and the depth there. They've obviously got the young fella who debuted at the back end of